أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين، حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا، سيدنا ومولانا أبا القاسم محمد عليه وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأراضين، روح وأرواح العالمين لتراب مقدمه الفدا، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين منذ آدم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. قال تعالى في محكم التنزيل بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: وليبتلي الله ما في صدوركم وليمحص ما في قلوبكم والله عليم بذات الصدور. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Allah Azza wa Jal says in Surah Al-Imran, He says, and that Allah might test what was in your breasts, and that He might purge what was in your hearts, and Allah knows what is in the breasts. Sadaq Allahu al-Aliyyu al-Azim. Continuing on with these divine laws that Allah Azza wa Jal governs the existence with and governs our day-to-day affairs, and as we said, depending on our interaction with these laws, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for us results. Comes the law of hardships and burdens. And we understand from the verse that we opened up with and other verses of the Holy Quran that these hardships and these burdens are a divine law, just like the laws that we have mentioned several times over the last few nights. This is one of those laws. It is one of those controls that Allah Azza wa Jal has created and put in place in order to govern you and I. And depending on my interaction or my reaction to these particular burdens and these hardships, Allah Azza wa Jal will treat me accordingly and will give me a result accordingly. Allah Azza wa Jal over 30 times in the Holy Quran mentions this law. And He says to us through the verses of the Holy Quran and through His noble Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa alihi and through Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam and the rest of the Imam salamullahi alayhi, that this was the sunnah of the people before you. This was the law and the regulation that Allah Azza wa Jal used for the people before you. What is the purpose of this law? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers in the verse of the Holy Quran. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He uses this, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِيُمْحِصَ. Yeah? This term, mahas, is used in several different forms in the Arabic language. It's most commonly used by blacksmiths when they're forging steel, or when they are purifying gold. And it is the process of beating and squeezing in order to reach this level of purification. We see from this verse that Allah Azza wa Jal is using these hardships and these tests, and He's telling us definitely these tests, they're necessary. Yeah? You need to go through them. In another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسِ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do men think that they will be left alone on saying we believe and not be tried? وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. And we certainly tried those before them. فَلْيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا وَلْيَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ. So Allah will certainly know those who are true, and He will certainly know the liars. So as an introduction, Allah Azza wa Jal introduces this law to us, and He says that your hardships and your trials and your burdens and your tribulations, I'm giving you a reasoning for them. I am telling you what they are for. And I am letting you know that they are from me. And I am letting you know that it is a divine and historical law that I have applied to govern existence and govern the cosmos. And it has been around from the very beginning. Allah Azza wa Jal is telling you that before you, I have tried the nations before you with it. And I tried them so that I may know those who are truthful to the covenant and those who are liars. And I use it so that I may cipher and filter out the weak from the strong. This is the reasoning that Allah Azza wa Jalla is giving. And then He tells us this is your actual logic needs to comprehend this. He says, did you think that I was going to leave you to say simply we believe and you'll not be tried? That Iman is simply a declaration on the tongue? No, Allah Azza wa Jalla wants to test you. You need to earn this favor of Allah Azza wa Jalla. So He put His awliya and His anbiya and His rusul through the harshest of trials. And the closer one got to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the harsher and the harder and the stronger and the more unbearable these trials became. We see that Allah Azza wa Jal describes Himself as light in the Holy Quran. Allahu nuru as-samawati wal ard. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. So some of our mystics use the example that the closer one got to the light, so the closer one gets to Allah Azza wa Jal, then the more he is exposed to the factors of this light and the intensity of this light and the heat of this light, until eventually one melts in the love of Allah Azza wa Jal. But this is all depending on your interaction. And we have seen how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through extreme hardships and burdens, He has elevated His prophets and His awliya. Give an example for the sisters and an example for the brothers. We see Sayeda Maryam salamullahi alayha. Her story in the Holy Quran is one of the most beautiful stories that one can hear. And you look at this test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given. It was a test in her honor and in her dignity. It was a hard test for Maryam alayhi salam. A young teenage girl in her early teens, 11 or 12 years old, barely a teenager. To fall pregnant. In the eyes of society, this was big. This was massive. It would have been easier for her to be killed. And she declares this, يَا لَيْتَنِي مِتُّ قَبْلَ هَذَا وَكُنْتُ نَسْيًا مَنْسِيًّا. If only I had died before this and was a thing that was forgotten. Maryam alayha salam, if she did not understand and did not have this knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal, that through this trial and tribulation, I am elevated towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she would have done what any woman in today's age at the very least, in order to save herself from people's tongues. She could have not gone through with the pregnancy. She could have ran away and never came back. But can you imagine her bravery when she comes back with the child? Simply because of her reliance on Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal says to her, go back to the people and take the child and don't speak to anyone. We will do the talking for you, Ya Maryam, because you were patient in this trial. We will speak for you. We will allow the child to speak and defend you, Ya Maryam. Because you saw this as an opportunity to be elevated towards Allah Azza wa Jal. Because you followed through with the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you were true to the covenant. As Allah Azza wa Jal says in the verses we recited, that He wants to test our hearts and see who amongst us is true to the covenant and who is a liar. Ya Maryam, you were true to the covenant. So I will make the child speak on your behalf. You don't need to talk to anyone. Personally, Allah Ta'ala will defend you. She understood this beauty and Allah Azza wa Jal defended her. And she saw the beauty in her trials and in her burdens. With Nabiullah Ibrahim alayhi salam, the same thing. Allah Azza wa Jal, after 100 years of Ibrahim waiting for a child, salamullah alayh, gives him Ismail. And after He gives him Ismail and Ibrahim is attached to him as a child, a baby, in the cradle, a few months old, He says, now take him and throw him in the desert. And Ibrahim takes him. He accepts this trial and this burden because it's for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. He has that trust in Allah Ta'ala. As a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifests His beauty and wisdom in this trial when He says to Ibrahim alayhi salam, return after a few years, go back to this desert where you left your child. Ibrahim finds a city over there. A city has emerged around this child named Ismail alayhi salam. And it's the city of Mecca. Allah establishes the city of Mecca around Ismail. And it's the city which Allah Azza wa Jal is paid homage to until the end of days. It becomes the city of His pilgrimage until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And it is the city of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa. And it is the city in which Al-Hussain alayhi salam leaves from to begin his revolution. And it is the city where Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif, launches his mission and takes his bay'ah and calls the believers onto him. All of this began with the trial and the burden of Ibrahim alayhi salam. All of it. Through this sunnah, through this law, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that salvation, eternal salvation, heaven, is not free. Look at the following verse. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. Allah Azza wa Jal says in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 240. أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله ألا إن نصر الله قريب. Or do you think that you would enter the garden of heaven or paradise while yet the state of those who have passed away before you has not come upon you, meaning you have not been tested the way those before you have been tested? You think Jannah is free, you have a right to it? You expect that simply because I declare that Allah Azza wa Jal is one and I declare my belief in the Holy Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, then I deserve Jannah? You think it's a right that you have? Allah is telling you no. What passed on the people before you, what they went through, you must go through. The trials and tribulations they went through, you must go through similar burdens and similar trials and similar tribulations. Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, he says to his companions when they say to him, how long do we need to be patient for, Ya ibn Rasulillah? He says, those before you, meaning those who followed the monotheistic religion of Isa alayhi salam, those before you were cut with the saw until the steel of the saw was moving back and forth between their flesh and their bones. And they did not retreat and did not leave their religion. So what you're going through is easy, this is fine. Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says to us that the people of Musa, they were tested by a river. In the Holy Quran, we have the story of the army of Banu Israel when they're sent out to fight Goliath. This is the story of David and Goliath. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests them with a river. He says to them, when you get to the river, Allah Azza wa Jal puts a test. He says, I know you're all thirsty, but when you get to the river, those of you that drink more than one handful of water can no longer be from amongst the soldiers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You were only allowed one handful. And the majority of the army failed the test. And the army of the believers was left with only a handful of loyalists, of those who were true to the covenant. And they continued on to battle. And amongst them is Nabiullah Dawood alayhi salam. And they get there. And this handful of believers was enough to defeat a large army that was more prepared than they were. This sunnah of Allah Azza wa Jal is put in place in order so that He may select the elites amongst you. So that this ummah is tested and purified the way that gold is tested and purified, as the hadith of Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam says. In another narration, Imam Al-Baqir alayhi salam is asked, when will the coming of Al-Qa'im ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-sharif be? He says, hayhat, hayhat, la yakun farajana. He says, basically, hayhat, hayhat, it is far away or be far away. This relief of Al-Mahdi alayhi salam will not come until you guys are sifted. Until the believers are trialed and sifted. And he says it 3 times. Until they are tested. Until they learn to view the beauty in the hardships and in the trials and in the burdens. Because Allah Ta'ala does not and cannot jeopardize the mission and the safety and the security of the final Imam of mankind. He can't have the Imam emerge before his Shia are tested. They need to be tested. You know, even Sayeda Zainab alayhi salam, on the night of Ashura, there's a recommendation and a suggestion she gives to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. She says to him, my dear brother, have you tested your companions? Have you tested their loyalty? For I fear that tomorrow they will abandon you and leave you alone. And Hussain alayhi salam, he says, so of course I have tested them. And I gave them clemency. And I told them to take the darkness of the night as a cover and leave. And there will be no blame on them. And they remained, Ya Zainab. And we saw the beauty of this patience manifest on the day of Ashura. We saw it in the companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. We saw them enter the battlefield without any fear, with full trust in the promise of Allah Ta'ala. They passed the test. And because they passed this test, these companions until the day of judgment will be commemorated in the heavens and in the earth. And their story is told year in and year out. And they are mourned and remembered and commemorated and venerated and visited by millions and millions of Muslims and believers from all over the world, all year round. Because when Allah Ta'ala tested their hearts, they passed this test. This applies to you and I. Allah Ta'ala is telling us, I want you to be amongst those who join the camp of Sahib al-Zaman. I want you to arrive at the camp of Sahib al-Zaman alayhi salam, and I want the best of you to arrive. That in the philosophy of warfare, if in my squad or in my platoon there is one weak element, one weak soldier who doesn't follow orders, who is afraid, who goes off and does his own thing, he jeopardizes the safety of everyone else in that platoon. Everyone's now in danger because of this guy. How we cipher these people out, Allah Azza wa Jalla is telling us through these hardships. And these hardships, they can be anything. These burdens can be anything. Our daily affairs sometimes burden us. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might burden me with a bad husband, for example, or a bad wife. If I am dealing now with this bad spouse, bad husband and bad wife, in accordance with the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm dealing with this bad spouse in the way that Allah ta'ala wants, then I'll be elevated. You know, we have a story, and I'm not telling jokes, it's an actual story of one of our ulama. And he was known to have a lofty spiritual position. He was one of the mystics. And his students and those in Qom, all of them knew him for this. And they see that one day, he never takes a day off, but there was a day where he doesn't come to class, doesn't come to his class. And the second day he doesn't come, they say he must be sick. So they go looking for their teacher. And they go to his house. They've never been to his house before. And when they get to his house, they hear a woman inside screaming and yelling and using bad words. And they knock on the door and they say, is this the house of Sheikh Fulan? She says, Sheikh, this guy is this and this and this and this. And his wife is like having a go at him. And the Sheikh comes out like all humble. Assalamu alaikum. Please forgive me. I must have upset her. His students, they say, we're just coming to check if you're okay. He says, I was feeling unwell. And then, so they leave. They leave and they go off. And then they speak to one of his teachers. They say, look, we went to Sheikh's house. And this is happening. He says, this is why Allah Azza wa Jal has elevated him in ranks. Because he's patient with the akhlaq of his wife. And Allah Azza wa Jal says to the sisters too, when you are patient with the bad akhlaq of your husband, then you are like the one who has shed her blood for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. He says to you, this is your jihad. I will elevate you in rank. Those who struggle for our cause, Allah Azza wa Jal says, we will guide them to our path. Allah Ta'ala says, we will raise them in ranks. You deal with him this way, in a proper way, I will elevate. You deal with your wife and her ill mannerism in a negative manner, outside of the realm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's shari', then you will fall. You will fail this test. You have turned this bala, which is supposed to be beauty, into destruction. You've destroyed yourself with it. And the same with the sisters. And please, don't get picky on the examples. Every time I give an example about marriage, brothers come, you gave the sisters too much, and then sisters, you're anti-woman, and just relax. It's an example. Take the message, go home with it. I don't want to hear it, Wallah. Sallu ala Muhammad. I got to take time now out of the lecture to give 2 examples. I could have just given 1, but people get upset, bro. Like, anyway, inshallah. These burdens, when I understand that Allah Azza wa Jal is beauty, and I understand that these burdens are the law of Allah Ta'ala, and I understand that through them I am elevated, I reach Sayeda Zainab alayha salam in the court of Ibn Ziyad. By nature, Zainab salamullahi alayha, the daughter of the Quran, who understands and is a manifestation of these laws, can happily stand and say to him, Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. She saw these burdens and she saw nothing but beauty. Why? Because she saw her brother Al Hussain alayhi salam, and Al Abbas alayhi salam, and Al Akbar alayhi salam, and Al Qasim alayhi salam, and her 2 children Muhammad and Aun alayhum salam, and all the children of her brothers, and all the companions of her brother Al Hussain. She saw them pass this test. So she saw the manifestation of this beauty. She saw the emergence of this beauty. She saw their elevation. Al-Hussain alayhi salam understood that his spiritual rank is far greater than his worldly rank. In the realm of this dunya, he has a great status. He's the grandson of the Holy Messenger. He's the heart of the Holy Messenger. He's the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. He's the son of Fatima alayhi salam. He's the Imam of all of the Muslims. All of these great and lofty positions are his dunyawi ranks. But he understands that there is a particular rank for him in the realm of spirituality, in the spiritual reality, that cannot be attained except through this martyrdom. And more than this martyrdom, if Ibrahim alayhi salam, through the burden of being asked to slaughter Ismail alayhi salam, he was raised to the rank of imamah. You know, Ibrahim alayhi salam, the second test he has with Ismail after leaving him in the desert, Allah tells him to do what? He says, now take him and kill him. Our narrations say to us that the actual knife slides on the throat of Ismail. So he literally carries out the act, but Allah commands that the knife not cut. When Ibrahim alayhi salam passes this test, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevates him from the level of Khalil. And before that, he was a Nabi, he was a Rasul, then he became a Khalil. Then he elevates him to the rank of Imam. Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama. To show the lofty status of Imama, Allah Azza wa Jal promotes him, He elevates him. But He saved Ismail. Ismail alayhi salam was not killed. وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ. And we ransomed him with a great sacrifice. Al-Hussain alayhi salam, not only was he requested and not only was it required of him to sacrifice himself, but he had to ascertain and be certain that every single one of his companions on that day, including his Akbar, including his Asghar, including Al-Qasim alayhi salam, including Al-Abbas alayhi salam, every single one of them was slaughtered. He gave them all for Allah, then looked at Allah Ta'ala and said, أَرَضِيتَ يَا رَبِّ خُذْ حَتَّى تَرْضَى. Are you satisfied, O God? Take until you are satisfied. And then in order to ascertain or reach that lofty spiritual position, Al-Hussain alayhi salam gave himself. In the most beautiful display of Tawheed, Karbala, the day of Ashura, is the most beautiful display of Tawheed in the history of mankind. So that you and I may understand and comprehend that whatever burdens and whatever hardships I have, whatever I am faced with in my life, I have two options. I either interact with this as Allah Azza wa Jal willed and I am elevated, or I interact with it in the complete opposite manner and I am destroyed with it. Our burdens are our salvations. They're our springboard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Pay attention to Ziyarat Ashura. The Imam alayhi salam, he says, Alhamdulillah ala azim raziyati. He is thanking Allah, praising Allah for the greatness of this tragedy. Because the Imam sees with the eyes of the Holy Quran and understands that the greater the tragedy, the greater that I am elevated towards Allah Ta'ala. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.